Good evening. Please be seated. Feel most welcome, all of you, and especially our guest of honor, Mr. Saad Mohseni. What happens when the spotlight fades or extinguished? We are aware of the situation in Afghanistan, most of us here, I'm sure. We are also aware of media workers flying in hundreds and thousands, perhaps. There's a huge exodus, but many people still stay. Many media are closing. Last figures I heard was 513 out of 744. And they close to a combination of economic constraints and, of course, cultural, political constraints, as we observe. Some media still function, though. So-so, we could say, and we will hear much more about that in a little while in the panel. After the Taliban takeover, we've also seen journalists flogged, rather brutal pictures shown. Some have been in detention, but then released. I guess it's a kind of scare-straight policy that's been applied here. And we also know that the media workers who remain need to navigate on a red line and also need to know that what they do should be in accordance with a very strict interpretation of Islam. With us to discuss all this today, we have, as I said also earlier, Mr. Saad Mohseni, who is the CEO of Moby Group, the very big South Asian outreach nowadays, perhaps smaller in Afghanistan for the time being, or at least with a slightly smaller media diversity, since they no longer can have soap operas or Stjernekamp in Norwegian, Afghanistan in Afghanistan, and other musical programs and a broad range of other entertainment programs. News are still coming out, though. Saad Mohseni is also the CEO of Tolo Group, or Tolo TV. There is also Tolo News, and there is a radio station in this conglomerate. Very welcome to him, but on the stage we will also have with us Kai Eide, a very seasoned diplomat who has served as the UN representative in Kabul, in Afghanistan, for 2 years, and that's in UNAMA, as it's called. And he also has followed the situation in Afghanistan much since then. Not least, but last, Hasina Shirzad, who is a MA student of journalism with a journalist career from Afghanistan until that had a very abrupt end. She's also worked for the Election Commission in Afghanistan, and here both writes articles and engages much in the Afghanistan follow-up, so to say, since she's engaged with me and some others here in a media project following the development of Afghan media after the Taliban takeover. So the question, one of the many questions will be, are we now back to zero? I observed media in Taliban in 1997. That was a very quick calculation. There was one Radio Sharia and one stenciled kind of newspaper. History never repeats itself totally, but it could develop in absurd manners still. But that is what we're here to hear more about. So I now give the floor to this group of people. Saad Mohseni, please give him a warm welcome. Kai Eide and Hasina Shirzad.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We thought we would broaden it a little bit from the media picture, of course, because many of you are certainly curious to see what else is going on in Afghanistan at the moment. And having been through meetings with you over the last 24 hours, I know that you have strong opinions on many things that are relevant to the public. Been to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to NORAD, to other agencies and institutions here, who, I must say, I think have been updated well by Saad's stories. We would, of course, start with the media situation and spend time on that, since that is your profession. You built up a media conglomerate. over the last 20 years. Very impressive. And then August this year came, 15th of August, the total shock that we all know from media footage. People fleeing, journalists leaving the country in great numbers. So what went through your mind, Saad, when that happened and you had all this background behind you of what you had built up?
Well, I mean, well, we have to go back to the 15th of April, when the Americans first announced that they would pull out. Our contingency plans kicked in, and the idea was to move as many people out as possible, move the operations out. We then had discussions with people in Central Asia, with the Uzbeks in particular, and looked at various other operations, sort of a modular things, that we could do certain things in one city, other things in other cities, and put it all together in a place like Dubai and uplink via Europe or the Middle East, and effectively have a series of pirate stations based outside of Afghanistan. But the country collapsed a lot quicker than we had expected. Even we were surprised, and I was always seen as someone quite negative as far as the survival prospects of the state. So, and because we were sort of in the middle of the peace talks and the discussions and the transitional arrangements, so every single day we were kept abreast of what was going on, and the idea was for perhaps a transitional arrangement that would emerge, that would take over the government around the 15th of August. But with the departure of the president, it's sort of fast-tracked, which may have been inevitable anyway. So then we were stuck. And on the 16th of August, a group of people walked in, and they were the Taliban. And we were all waiting outside to see what was going to happen, and we were getting minutely updates from someone on the phone. They came in and they checked for the guns and the security team, and they said, "Who's issued you your guns?" And then they walked out. And then we didn't hear back from them for a few days. They sent a spokesperson to speak on live television, was interviewed by a young woman.
A young woman after they took over?
Yeah. So it was unexpected. I think they too were surprised by how quickly they were in Kabul. And we found that we have tried to work with them, and they've tried to work with the media. So fast forward, it's been 3 months. We still have 400 employees. I think we lost 70 or 80 employees almost immediately. But we replaced them. We interviewed other people, and there were thousands of CVs submitted online, or people sent them, physically sending CVs in through the door. And this process of interviewing people and whatever. So we just, continuity for us became really important. I mean, for a period we thought we couldn't carry on because we didn't have technical people, we didn't have journalists. But within days, we managed to hire enough people, some inexperienced, but very good, and some others who'd worked for these small organizations which just shut down. But I think what's important to note, we're amongst friends, writers and journalists, is in 2016, I was in India on the 20th, and I saw a news story that a bus had been attacked in the western side of Kabul. And there was a breaking story, and we were reporting on this bus that was attacked, and the realization that it was one of our buses. And we lost 7 employees, 15 injured, some permanently. And, the first couple of days was a blur, identifying the dead bodies, visiting the families, telling them about their children who'd been lost because some had assumed that they had just been injured, burying them. And then we had this meeting, and we dismissed all our staff members, and we said, you don't have to come in. But the key staff, they have to come in so we can discuss what we do next. And then I came out, it was January, it was cold. There were 700 employees. At that time, we had a much bigger team, all standing outside. And I put 2 things to them. I said, what do we do? Do we shut down the news operations? If it's not worth it, well, we're happy to walk away from it. And unanimously, they said, no, we would like to carry on. We would like to continue. They were stoic, they were courageous. There were tears, but not tears of fear, but tears of courage and great determination to carry on. And then the second thing I put to them is that if we're going to do this, do we remain committed to supporting the peace process? And again, unanimously, they said, yes, we should, and we will. And for me, that moment was a realization that we had built an institution. And this is one of Afghanistan's great success stories of the last 20 years, that free media, and I always say this, that whether you look at Sri Lanka or India or the Middle East or Central Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, there has been no freer market than the Afghan media market. And this is not a Western thing that we've adopted. I think as Afghans, we've always felt free to express ourselves. It's in our DNA. And we were lucky to have been given this opportunity to build this business, which we have. We'd like to continue. And I think even today, and the situation in Afghanistan is not black and white. It's not, every media organization is bullied. Some are bullied, some journalists are beaten up. But we're also in this really difficult environment where we have to navigate so many different things in this difficult terrain. We're managing to do what we can. We're reporting on facts, we're informing people, we're hoping to educate people, we're entertaining people. We do have soap operas. We have Korean soap operas. We have Turkish costume dramas. Not necessarily modern Turkish soap operas, but somehow because they look Asiatic, they're more acceptable to the Taliban. We don't have music, but we're testing things with like Sufi music.
Sorry,
yeah.
I couldn't try. How is the situation now for journalists? Because in 2016, it was a totally different environment.
Of course.
Are they in danger today? How do they cope? Like, how is your staff doing now?
It's with great difficulty. In 2003, 4, 5, 6, we had different safety nets. We had the international community, which had insisted on freedom of expression. This was enshrined in the Bonn Agreement and then in our constitution. Even within the government, we had supporters. In Parliament, we had supporters. Today, I mean, it's like, being on a tightrope with no security, with no safety net. So it's very difficult, it's very challenging, it's very scary for the journalists on the ground. And and I have to be honest with you, if things remain the same today in 6 months, it would be a huge success. Our fear is that it's going to become a lot more restrictive and this environment will not last. I cannot tell you what's going to happen tomorrow because every single day we deal with different challenges and we deal with them on a, challenge by challenge. It's not easy. I mean, Afghanistan had this wonderful opportunity, but in a lot of ways, it's a changed country. You see women protesting on the streets or at home. This wouldn't have happened. I mean, this entire generation of young people has been transformed by the 20 years, thanks to your contribution and your presence in the country and your money.
Yeah, but then when women protest and media is not able to actually report on it, how do you see that?
We report on it.
Sometimes not. I have been following. And where the red lines goes, I'm like, bluntly, of course, the media and the Tolo and all of the media in Afghanistan cannot report the same way as they have been doing. But where are the lines? How is the self-censorship for your journalists?
Well, I think when it comes to entertainment, we obviously self-censor, whether it's music or drama series. But in terms of reporting on facts, the key things, they have to report on them, one way or another. They have to figure out a way of reporting on them. If there are allegations in Panjshir, they've reported on it. The human rights issues in Herat, as reported by HRW, we reported on it, we had programs on it. Women protesting, we've reported on them as much as we possibly could. I'm not sure about every incident, but I follow the news and they report on these stories. How they do it is obviously very different. It's not as combative. The journalists, when they ask questions, you know, you're dealing with a very unpredictable bunch of people. But what also they're trying to figure out, and this is what we're learning as we go along, is that they're starting to find relationships within the Taliban where they can actually talk to people, whether it's about journalists getting beaten up, and our journalist was beaten up just recently in Torkham. The Taliban sent a minder with him, so he would have access. The Taliban beat him up, threw his camera in the water, and then beat up the Taliban minder as well. So these are things which are unpredictable. But that's not to say we didn't have similar challenges with the previous government. We had, including my brother, locked up at the intelligence agency. We've had people beaten up, people apprehended for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the NDS. I think during the time you were there, around the 2008, 2009 mark. We just have to adjust, and we have to learn to do this. But we have red lines. I mean, for us, the nuclear option is to move out of Afghanistan. We've set up a news desk in London now that will complement the Afghan desk. We're doing a lot of the entertainment stuff that we will air on satellite, with Afghan stuff, for example, and some of the music stuff. We're producing a lot of new music now, for example. Some of the production is in Afghanistan, but we're going to air it on YouTube. We have a Netflix-type platform that's going to, you know, host a lot of this sort of content that may not be acceptable to the Taliban. So we're going to ring-fence some of the existing operations in Afghanistan, but we're going to create a lot of other things around it. It's not easy. It's not perfect. But us remaining in the country, in a studio where we have a Taliban guy debating an issue with a woman, I think I see that as a plus. I don't see that as a compromise on our part. But it may reach a time that we may say that we can't continue this in Afghanistan, we pull out.
Well, I'm a woman, so I'm going to ask straight, how is it for women journalists? Is it different? Because I have seen that there's less women represented now in Tolo, and there's only narrations that they have in news, not much faces.
No, we have 10 presenters. We have journalists, we have presenters for both entertainment and news programs.
Is it the same as before for women journalists, or?
No, it's not the same as before, but we're actually trying to build capacity now. We're trying to hire, I mean, I was just mentioning before today, 2 days ago we were told by the Taliban, after insisting and pushing for it, that we can now hire women outside the city of Kabul, but they asked us not to publicize it. But we're going to do that, and we're going to have a specific program that's going to allow us to hire these women. These women are very courageous. They come forward, they want to work, but they have issues with their families. They're scared. I mean, for a period, we were scared that even on the way from home to work, you know, because cars were getting stopped, because there was a ban on women working for the government. But until the security people, the checkpoints discovered that, no, if you work for a private business, you can go to work if you're a woman. So navigating through those things is going to be challenging. By the way, when the government fell on August the 15th, I mean, who would have thought that there would be a media in the country? I mean, I don't think there is no comparison between a democracy of pre-August 15 and the Afghanistan today that's run effectively by people who have no sophistication, have no understanding of how the modern day world works. Many of them have lived in, you know, in provincial capitals or in Pakistan, have been in hiding. I don't think we can, there's no comparison between the pre-August 15th environment today. And we shouldn't expect the situation to be the same. Can we change the Taliban? I don't know. I mean, can the Taliban be persuaded to adopt a more inclusive, they can govern in a broader way that could help ultimately protect some of the gains of the last 20 years? Perhaps it should be given, we should all try. But as I said, there are no certainties. And you know, the fact is, they control the country now. They have all the leverage.
But you said that you were in fact recruiting journalists. You said 3,000 applicants to fill positions that had become vacant because people are leaving. How do you interpret that? Because it's a rather brave decision to apply as a journalist in this time.
I think they're, well, let's be honest. I mean, they're motivated by if they work for a media company, they can apply for a visa outside. So that certainly is an incentive. Second thing is that the country is facing its biggest challenge in its history in terms of the economic and humanitarian crises. $100 today is worth $5,000 3 months ago. No, I'm serious. You can feed an entire clan with $100 nowadays per month. So people need the money. And thirdly, I think this country, which is the youngest outside of sub-Saharan Africa, young people want to be engaged. They want to be in the media. They're excited by it. They're educated. They want to make a difference. So I think there are a whole range of factors contributing to why women or men want to work for us. And CVs are continuing to come in, even now.
You say that you are basically with an element of self-censorship, of course, but you're basically allowed to continue, and you continue broadcasting news. You have Taliban representatives asking to come on the show. Do they also see some kind of advantage of media landscape still existing?
Of course. They were always savvier than the government in terms of how they use media. They will make attempts to manipulate, like any government would. And they can have their messages amplified. But for an organization that's so dictatorial, they also view that accountability is important. We've had stories on corruption with the passports office, for example, and they've taken that very seriously. There was a businessman, former member of parliament, who was beaten up and humiliated, put on the back of a pickup truck. They've taken that very seriously, for example. So, in their own bizarre sort of a way. But also, I think you have to remember that even the Taliban fighter, this 21-year-old kid who's been fighting, he's been using Telegram and Signal and WhatsApp, and he's been consuming content on Facebook. I mean, even for the Taliban rank and file, it's a different world to the one in the mid-1990s, the one you saw. So it's not that black and white. Are the Taliban different? Yes. Can they go back to the way they were? Yes. That too is a possibility.
Do you see differences then from one part of the country to the other in the way?
We see differences in one part of the city of Kabul to another part of Kabul. In one area, it's the Badakhshani Taliban, basically maintaining security. If you go further up, there's a group from Logar, and there's further up there's a group from some other part of Afghanistan. They have completely different mindsets. They look differently. They speak differently. So they don't have. I mean, they're trying to formalize things and give them uniforms and all of that. But it's a very. I'm just saying, getting from home to work is a challenge for most Afghans nowadays.
But I know that there is no constitution right now. And how is it about the freedom of expression law? Does it the same law? Or are there rules? Do they have guides?
They've issued 11 directives, including demanding that they be called the Emirate of Taliban. We've complied with that. But the others are vague. And actually, they're not that different to the Karzai and Ghani directives, that you cannot act in, you should always act in the interest of the state, which is always vague enough that can be interpreted.
You cannot talk against the national figures.
National interest, national figures, and all of those things. But they one of the people ask why the Taliban have been so, what's the word, receptive or engaged, and I think it's partly because they understand the importance of media, and secondly, I think it's possible that they haven't had the bandwidth to deal with us. They're dealing with ISIS, they're dealing with a country on the verge of starvation, they're dealing with the issue of recognition, they have a lot of internal issues that they have to deal with. They haven't had the time to deal with the media, and a more restrictive environment may very well come. But for as long as we can, we will do what best we can, which is to inform the Afghan public, to educate them.
You represent, of course, the largest media group. Many of the small, I assume, have disappeared.
Yeah.
So that means that you play an even larger role today in informing the public than you did before the 15th of August.
Yeah, I mean,
do you know anything about how many, have you been able to measure?
Yeah, our viewership immediately after the fall of Kabul doubled. The fact that it was up 86% using YouTube metrics and just our own basic surveys. Those numbers have come back a little bit, of course, but they're still higher than they were in early August. It's because people care and what's happening on a daily basis. So they want to consume news stories and debating programs and all of that. But the Afghan public is very engaged media-wise. Something like 80% of households have a television set. 95% listen to the radio. And it's very important for them to follow what's going on. And that's been going back to the 80s when the Russians invaded in 1980. So it's a very engaged population. It's very plugged in. Online and internet is obviously, penetration is not as high. It's about 15 or 20%. But conventional media, linear televisions, linear media like TV, satellite, and so forth, terrestrial and satellite, most people have access to it.
You've said during meetings we've been in that you are playing the role of a bridge from the pre-15th of August to something else, some time ahead to be defined. Could you say more about what you put into that concept?
Well, I mean, I know people are dismissive of music and all of that, but for us, poetry is important for us, music's important for us. All the cultural stuff is very important as well. I think we have an obligation to keep as much of this going and alive, but also to protect and, to defend, I wouldn't call them universal values, whether it's women's rights or free expression. And I think the media, in a lot of ways, will keep on topping up what people understand. And we become effectively the bridge between the pre-Taliban days to whenever. And I think that whenever may come a lot quicker than you think. Either the Taliban would have to adjust, or they're not going to be able to govern this country, which is double the size of what it was in 2001. We've gone from 20 million to 38 million. 65% of the population is under 22 or 23. Of the younger population, of the under 25s, literacy rate is like 75%. So you're dealing with this Afghanistan that's vastly urbanized, aspirational. I often tell my American friends, for you, the stalemate that you always talked about, for us was precious and sweet. Every single day allowed us to develop a bit more, to get a bit better educated. Every single minute was important and precious to us. So to get deprived of that has been a major, obviously, shock to the system. But the Afghans, I think, are a resilient bunch. And I think in 5 years, we may look back and say, that 20 years was important. We transformed this country, and Afghanistan has changed for the better. The Afghanistan of the 1970s, people talk about my parents' generation, was a terrible country for its minorities. Only 8% literacy rate in the 1970s. There were a dozen families that prospered. They were racist. They discriminated. My father was a foreign ministry official. There were no Shias working for the foreign affairs ministry, except for one guy who was my father's deputy. And he was not a Hazara. He was a Qizilbash from Herat. So this 20 years was the golden period for Afghanistan. And I think it's important for us not to walk away from these gains and to support these gains. We talk about evacuating people. We talk about so many other things. But the 38 million people stuck inside the country, I think we need to pay attention to them if we can.
How's the brain drain? For example, you talked about literacy rate, and obviously those who are leaving the country, they are the ones who have studied and has resources. And how it looks for Afghanistan and, of course, for the West, where...
It's, we've lost our best. But as I said, the bench is pretty deep. I think we will probably lose 250 to 300,000 Afghans through these P2 and SIV type arrangements. And then there could be millions of others who may go to Pakistan and Iran, and they're less educated. But don't forget that the last 20 years has given us not a couple 100,000 educated people, but it's given us millions of educated people. As we're discovering, as these people are coming in for applying for jobs, you know, they seem to have the aptitude and the education to be able to carry on. But yeah, of course, brain drain is going to be an important thing. I mean, we have people who want to go back now. And now we have this process of warning them and telling them that, you know, you're not going to be able to get out. But a lot of people do want to go back because they have their families there, they're homesick. They know they're going to be stuck in Albania or Mexico or in Georgia or in Serbia for 2 years. And once they get to the US, what will they do? It's, you know, I remember from when I was a kid that the immigrant experience is a difficult one. Our parents suffered a lot. So it's important for the world to engage in Afghanistan.
Can I just, before we leave this issue of the media and go to broader themes, you mentioned several times during our conversations that you want to do something you've not done before. For instance, since the education system is collapsing basically, and it is very poor health, you can contribute to keeping education going through various projects that you have been talking about today. Can you mention a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I, let's put it this way, some of the older people here, they do remember when there were 2 or 3 networks, whether it was in Norway or Australia or the US, the family gathered around this TV set, and it was on pretty much 24/7. They turned it on in the morning, it was kept on throughout the day. Afghanistan is in that situation today. Most households are either a single TV household, or they're communal TV sets, or they go to their neighbors' homes, or whatever, they watch television. And for television, you don't need much, except a battery, car battery, for example, can power up a TV station, or these small solar charging stations. You know, you can charge your phone, you can charge your TV, and whatever. Or charge the battery that would power the TV. So there's enormous opportunity that 80% of Afghan households get to watch television. So why not use that platform in terms of doing, in particular, health and education programs? During COVID, we discovered that by designing education programs for like an hour or 2, how effective they were, not just in terms of the kids, but also the parents. Also, we did things like Sesame Street and so forth. So I think using conventional media, and over time, then of course, the add-on will be interactivity using online apps and so forth. But I think there's enormous opportunity to keep, you know, because we're going to lose a lot of teachers. If we haven't lost enough already, a lot of them may leave. Is that how do we keep that standard of education going, especially in terms of sciences and literature and so forth, languages, for example. I think media can be utilized to help educate people, or at least maintain a certain level. And you can have 2 3-hour blocks in the morning and in the afternoon, because in Afghanistan they tend to split schools. We don't have enough infrastructure, so some people go in the morning, some people go in the afternoons. So you can have 2 blocks of education programs, and of course health, for example. You know, a lot of women are not going to be able to gain access to clinics. How do you address some of their concerns if they have issues? And we've done this before over the years. I think we can do it in a more scientific and proper way going forward.
Now, you were talking about the Taliban. Taliban is coming to the office. But who are these people? Who are the Taliban? You know, we have the impression here that there's a hardline group. They're called the Haqqanis, and then there is this more moderate group, and we talk about Mullah Baradar, etc. But you know, this is seen from abroad. How do you see this really?
I don't know. I mean, it's a very fragmented organization. I'm not a Taliban expert, and however, for the people who've spent time with them over the last few weeks, it seems that the Haqqanis on social issues are more moderate, and some of the groups like the Mullah Baradar and others on social issues, they're much more conservative. But again, it's not that black and white, because within the Haqqani network, there are individuals who are more conservative, and there are others who are more moderate. And a decentralized movement has been able to survive because they're decentralized. You know, it's you have various cells which have operated. Now they don't have they're not as cohesive as they would have probably hoped. And for now, they've somehow kept the peace. But for how long will they be able to govern this country, given all the internal issues that they've had? And a lot of these things will come up. Because I think people want their share of power. And in particular, the greater Kandahar commanders have been deprived of a big share of power in Kabul. And I just suspect that we'll see some issues in the weeks ahead, in the months.
So it's a much more tense situation inside the Taliban that we imagine, more fragmented than we imagine.
Well, I mean, someone who was in Kandahar yesterday was telling me that the situation in Kandahar is very tense. You know, ISIS is stronger than it's ever been before. I mean, ISIS was non-existent in the south. It's the birthplace of the Taliban. For ISIS to raise its flag in Uruzgan or Kandahar and Helmand, unthinkable, even a few weeks ago.
Was it a demonstration of strength in the way that they used 5 suicide bombers for that attack in Kandahar? I mean, it must have been frightening for the Taliban people there.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing about the Taliban is the myth of the Taliban has been burst in terms of their ability to maintain security. You know, and this is going to be very important. My concern is that in 6 months we'll think back and say, well, the good old days of the Taliban. The situation could get much worse. Either the Taliban becomes far more hardcore and isolationist and oblivious to the demands of the international community and completely closes up Afghanistan a la 1990s and say if people starve to death, that's God's will. Or you may have a situation where you have a civil war. You know, there are $70 billion worth of arms in the country.
How much?
70 billion.
So, yeah. When you, of course, as you've seen here in Norway and in all other Western countries, the question is, how do we handle this situation? In the United States, of course, there is probably a feeling of bitterness or revenge, and the $9 billion are still frozen. What kind of recommendations would you give to a Norwegian government, for instance, in this situation?
I think you have to help the Afghan people of Afghanistan, the 38 million people, of which 23 million are on the verge of starvation. 8 million really on the verge of starvation, but the other 23 million also vulnerable to starving. If this continues, something like 98% of the population will be under the poverty line. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before. It's a combination of Yemen, South Sudan, and if we're not careful, of Rwanda during the genocide. You may have a Khmer Rouge type regime in addition to all the other problems that we have today. So the world has to do what it can to help the Afghan people. Now, how to get aid to people, how to pay school teachers, how to pay the public servants. All of these things the government could help. And I think that there is now, I think that even the Taliban realize that they cannot manage this on their own. So I think that there's an opportunity to go in and directly pay people or go in directly and distribute food. We have no other option. I think there's a moral duty to do something. And Afghanistan has been an international project for 20 years. You can't just walk away from it, right? And disown it, for example. But engaging the Taliban is also important. Engaging the region is also very important.
And when you say engaging the Taliban, you mean in a dialogue, or do you mean also engaging more in, for instance, assistance to keep the health service going and other vital services going? Or because all this cannot be done via NGOs, international or Afghan?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. It's sitting with them, talking to them, explaining things to them. They are not sophisticated. Their understanding of the economy is below zero, based on my discussions with them and others too. And they need guidance, you know. And I think that if they broaden their government, they support women's education, they support women's rights, they distance themselves from their groups of the likes of Al-Qaeda. I think that there should be a path for them in terms of recognition longer term. But you need to have clear benchmarks that they're made aware of.
But do you think that is possible with Taliban?
No, but I think the problem is that if we don't try, we will never know. And the likelihood, I would say it's 30% chance of it succeeding, but even 1%, I'd give it a go.
But on the other side, if the world continues to send money to Afghanistan and the Taliban are functioning, why would they change?
That's why I said it's going to be very important that the people of Afghanistan benefit. Mm-hmm. Because the alternative is that people die.
Yeah, but could we, for example, sideline, other governments can sideline the government of Taliban and just help people? Would that be a solution?
For me, the most important thing is to feed the people of Afghanistan. You've seen pictures of these kids starving. For me, humanitarian aid should not be used as leverage, ever. Mm. And this cannot become a political football, you know, that we have to show the Taliban, we have to show someone else. This is about the people of the country. Mm-hmm. And I was in Washington, I was with someone, well, you know, in the US government, and he said, well, you know, we cannot deal with the Haqqanis. I said, well, you allowed these people to emerge. You have no choice but to deal with them now. It's a problem that you allowed. You have to take some responsibility for the return of the Taliban, in one way or another.
So you mean getting our representatives back to Kabul, engaging in discussions?
Yeah,
being there, being able to assess and evaluate themselves?
Yes. You have to understand, you need to have an Afghanistan policy that's beyond evacuating people who worked with you, right? Let's focus on the 38 million Afghans. And then you have to also think through the consequences of not being engaged. Refugees, drugs, terrorism, this humanitarian crisis within the country, which we're seeing happening right this second. And then you have to also engage with the Taliban and the region to find out what leverage you have. How can you be relevant again? And of course, supporting and championing the gains of the last 20 years. We can't just walk away from them. These are, you know, this is something we've done collectively, right? Together, with your money, with your expertise, with your assistance, because of your presence. A lot of people, a lot of lives have been lost to get to where we are today. A lot of money's been spent. And I think these things are important, but to your point, I think it's very important from a communications perspective. The world has to stand up and say, listen, whatever we're going to do in Afghanistan, it's for the Afghan people. It's not for the government of Afghanistan. It's not for the Taliban. So engaging directly with the Afghan people through people like us, you know.
You know, you said we spent a lot of money. I looked only at the U.S. figures, and the U.S. figures from 2001 until today is about $980 billion. The Marshall Plan in today's dollars was 140 billion.
Yeah.
Which says something about the tremendous...
Well, but Kai, I mean, just to be honest about it, I mean, the money did a quick somersault in Kabul and left straight away, right? You know, road projects, $2.5 million per kilometer, were subcontracted for $500,000 and then eventually executed for $200,000. Most of the money was paid to contractors. Most of the money was for the soldiers. The cost of one soldier was $1 million per annum. So, to be fair to the Afghans, a lot of that money did not end up in Afghanistan, but still a lot of money did, yeah.
Absolutely.
For which we're thankful.
The stability, of course, you mentioned the various fractions of various components of the Taliban. And then you have the IS, and you also have these resistant fronts that are being established, or at least one, perhaps two. How do you see that playing out, particularly then the resistant front originating from the Panjshiris, I guess, and the IS, what you see as their... What do you believe or what do you fear what is... Can you in any way put our nervousness at rest over these kind of factors?
You mean the resistance that's emerging?
Yeah, I'm thinking now of the resistance from that consists of, well, Amrullah Saleh is certainly one, and that group. Can they mobilize people to really play a role?
I doubt it. There have been two... they were in power. They had the opportunities over the years to do many things, and they failed to do that. I think out of all of them, probably Ahmad Massoud's son is the cleanest, and he wasn't in government. I think he has a small base of supporters. But I think, listen, the Taliban were kicked out of Afghanistan in late 2001. It took them 2 or 3 years to regroup and re-emerge. And I think we will see opposition groups emerge in Afghanistan with time. But I think it's too early to say who's going to be leading what.
And the IS?
The
relationship between Taliban... I mean, Taliban soldiers are soldiers that have not received much salary either, etc. Do you see the possibility of disgruntled Taliban feeding into the IS?
We're seeing it.
You're seeing it.
We're seeing it. And the rise of Daesh, Khorasan, it's beyond anyone's expectation. They are a formidable force that can seriously challenge the Taliban. And the concern is that if the Taliban fragments and big commanders join ISIS, they could perhaps take over the country. You know, and I think there's that risk it's beginning to dawn on people within the Taliban that this may very well happen.
And also dawning on the neighboring countries, I assume.
Yeah.
China, Russia, Central Asian countries.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got buyer's remorse. You know, the Iranians, their approaches, their thinking is very different to what it was 3 months ago. Same with the Russians and Central Asians. I would suspect even the Pakistanis are nervous because they are on the Afghan problem today. I mean, just a few 100,000 refugees that the world is now planning for, which will, you know, they will flee to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and more into Pakistan and Iran. They're saying the regional cost will be over $1 billion. You know, who's going to pay for this?
Do you think that Taliban, as they go out of resources, they will be more flexible to kind of negotiate with previous leaders and those who have today left Afghanistan? Probably they're going to come back. Figures like Karzai and others would be involved in some time in the future?
I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is that if the situation deteriorates, you will have the most hardcore Taliban emerge. And their line will be, we tried to engage with the world. They were not interested. You know, move over, Mr. Muttaqi. You don't know what you're talking about. We're going to run the country now. And they will go to the thinking of the 1990s, and they'll become isolationists. They'll become hardcore. And if 1 million people die of starvation, that's God's will. My concern is that this movement, I mean, these people lived in caves, and they fought for 20 years. They had their villages bombed, their kids killed. They sent out their children to blow themselves up. A few $1 billion coming in or going is not going to have an impact on them. I think we're going to empower the more radical elements within. Listen, it's got to be a give and take. I think that if the Taliban are engaged and they start benefiting from it, obviously we're going to help a movement that's a very unsavory movement that's been responsible for, certainly for 11 of our employees' deaths, killings. But it is what it is. And I think we have to be pragmatic and realistic. And it's never that black and white and never that clear.
We cannot totally monopolize the discussion here. So, yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
No, wait. You have to have a microphone. Please introduce yourself when you
I'll do that.
ask a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this meeting. I really enjoyed it. My name is Pervis Kasai. I was a former Iranian ambassador in Scandinavia and Norway, 30 years old only. Career diplomat who were hoping that the Iranian Revolution will bring democracy, but due to the vacuum that Zahir Shah did in your country, so there is no alternative when you are killing all the political institutions. Who will win? The mullahs, Taliban, Khomeini. This is a fact. Same thing happened also in Egypt. So I came here. I am a humanist. I'm member, the board member of the Norwegian Arbeidet Party, Labour Party's International Forum. And I came here and then I said that my country was ruined. And then what I did, I just followed the resistance. I became a mulvarp as a mole in the embassy, and I was helping like Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat who helped lots of Jews. I have saved many, many people, giving them passport and saving their life. My question to you, I appreciate what you say, but I want to go to the history of the mankind. What was the fault of international community? Because I lived the Middle Age time when the Pope was a Khomeini, and then Martin Luther came and tried to really moderate the Christianity. And then we came down, and we Hitler, fascism, and Mussolini, Hirohito, and then we came to Stalinism, and then Khomeinism. There is two problems here. One is that we don't appreciate that those kings, like Zahir Shah, like Iranian king, they demolished all the political institutions. I was a young diplomat, only 22 years old. There is no political party. And when I wake up one day, Islamic Khomeini came and then galvanized the Iranian Revolution. So we have to accept this. And then the second thing is, looking for the moderates, it is a big mistake, because the world was helping moderating Iranian regime, some Khatami and this and that, civilization. Bundevik was helping. Where is the moderation? Today is the worst situation in Iran. So we should not go for the moderates within this ideology, which is aggressive. They hate civilization. This Islamism. It is a new fascism. So what do we do in order to help the resistance in these countries?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I meant moderate, I meant pragmatic people, people that the world can work with, because right now it's about starvation, people starving to death. Over time, listen, I think as we educate people, as people learn things for themselves, the day will come. 50 years in Iran, 100 years in Iran, 200 years. This is not a long time from a historical perspective. I think we have to be patient. Elizabeth, chairman of the Afghanistan committee.
Subcommittee, we should call ourselves, perhaps.
It's not the Afghanistan committee. It's not a subcommittee. It's the committee.
Okay, whatever you say, Kai, we can argue. No, I was wondering about more media stuff again, and how do you approach the feet and souls on the ground in your own organization when it comes to discussing the visible or invisible red lines in reporting? Because from what we have observed in our small research project so far is that, yes, there is critical news, yes, and you do report on important issues, and also you are obliged to always confront some Taliban spokesperson at the end of the story, and I see that happening. But on the other hand, how do you discuss with the staff who perhaps feel desperate, feel that there is no real room for journalism, opinionated stuff, cultural stuff, which is more or less not so much there? I think that's the most important question for me. But also, could you say something about other media? Is there in this situation where so many media are dwindling or giving up, so to say, shutting down, is there a sense of opening for cooperation between some of the remaining media, such as Pajvok, such as what's left of Dette, Rose, and Hasina Shirzad and other media?
Well, we've always been supportive of other media organizations. I've worked closely with them, including Pajwak and Hasina Shirzad and even Dette, Rose and others. It's difficult. I mean, we have these bi-weekly news meetings. I speak to a lot of the journalists personally. It's a difficult situation for them, especially when they get slapped around or intimidated or pushed around, and they feel very vulnerable. It's not easy. And in terms of media operations, I mean, we're seeing, so we're trying to be smart about this. For example, we found this guy who's like a regime loyalist, but is a critic, but can get away with the things he says. So we've just piloted a program that he looks at the different challenges that the country faces. I keep on forgetting this program. John Oliver does it in the US. That's on HBO. And Lizzie and I were talking, what was it called, Lizzie? This week? Last week tonight, without the comedy. So we do that type of a program. I just looked at the pilot episode. It's very good. It's very confrontational. This is what's going to happen with the reserves. These are the challenges. Interviewing some Taliban, interviewing some international experts. So we have to adapt. We have to find people that can actually confront the Taliban. By the way, we're making this up as we go along. We have no strategy. We have to come up with these ideas pretty much on the run, basically. But the key thing is, we're not just educating and informing the public, we're also educating and informing the Taliban, who are actually a lot more engaged with the media than Ashraf Ghani was. He never watched television, by the way, as surprising as that may sound. But we are willing to cooperate with others, work with others. BBC doesn't have an office, a bureau in Kabul now. They only have, Deutsche Welle as well, and others, and the VOA and others. And we're saying to them, listen, we can also be your eyes and ears on the ground. We have high-profile reporters who go, and then they'll go out, and then eventually there'll be no one there. So for us, we play this, if we're allowed to stay in the place. But I think it's important that that the international community you work with us in terms of building capacity, programming, funding for specific programs. I think that's going to be a tremendous help to a group like us.
You mentioned John Simpson today.
Yeah.
Was he there? He was there recently?
John Simpson?
Yeah.
John Simpson was there, and he did this radio program from Bamyan, and he broke down while reporting on a family in Bamyan, that he saw that family starving as something that was inevitable. And the way he was telling the story, he broke down. I don't think it's quite dawned on people outside. Today, we met with the NRC. They get it. A lot of other people get it. For a lot of other people, they think it may be just noise. They're not sure if this is going to happen, but it will, if we don't get involved.
Saad, you're an influential person. Is it different for other media who are like on the country level and they don't have as many resources as you?
Of course it is. But the thing is that Afghanistan was always a deeply subsidized media sector. We were always going to see consolidation. If not because of this, because of something else. We had too many TV stations funded by different organizations, sometimes individuals. And we were always going to see that consolidation. We're burning cash today, and we have resources, obviously. We've been a profitable company for a long time. We were a group that was also outside of the country. Yeah, it's going to be difficult for people, but that's the way it is.
By the way, how is it doing now? Because a lot of your income and the money finances came from advertisement. Yeah. How are you doing now?
As I mentioned, we're burning cash. We're spending our own money in terms of the operations. This is another issue that we're taking one day at a time. The longer-term prospects don't look good, especially if the economy continues to shrink, which it has. Our economy is expected to shrink by 50%. What happened to Syria over 11 years, it's happened to Afghanistan in 3 months.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mahmoud Farjami. I have been a journalist. I come from Iran. I have been a journalist for around 2 decades. And I come from Khorasan, from Iran, not Daesh, but Khorasan is the biggest state in Iran and maybe the north part of Afghanistan. Then I'm familiar with Afghanistan, and I have a lot of Afghan friends. And some of them are common, like the one in BBC. Whenever I talked with my Afghan friends about the media in Afghanistan, it end up with Tolo and your Moby Group. And some of them, they call you Murdoch of Afghanistan. And as well, they describe your group as an empire, not just a media group. And really, it's indeed, or it was indeed, huge. And you tell us that the money, it was financed by the advertisement, but we are talking about undeveloped country. And to be frank, I can't believe that the advertisement in the country like Afghanistan, that is not industrialized or developing, fast developing country, could be so huge to finance you. My question, I'm not to investigate you because I'm familiar with the media issues. Maybe you don't want to talk about that, but I'm very curious about the money, about the financial issues. Is it, or it was, used to be a self-sufficient group, or you are supported, financed by government, by some groups, or anything? Thank you.
Norwegian PEN is in favor of investigative journalism, you know, so yeah. That's quite all right.
No, we did receive a grant when we first started off, a small grant of $200,000 to set up Arman FM. And then when we set up a TV station, we also received an additional grant from USAID. So we're very transparent about that. But overall, we've been, with the exception of year one, which was in 2003, which we lost a small amount of money, we have been profitable every single year. And we're actually one of the few companies that's fully audited. And then in 2012, we had an alliance for a period with 21st Century Fox. So we're probably the most legitimate company in the country because we had a Fortune 500 company invest in us. So we've always believed in transparency. And our numbers, the Afghan advertising market was a big market, but mostly because of the international community. You know, you give money to the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health has money for communicating, you know, dealing with TB or polio or UNICEF or whatever. So was it an artificial advertising market? Perhaps, but it existed, it was real, there were advertising agencies, and I think that the annual spend probably peaked about 100 million in 2014, 2015, which, by the way, was bigger than a lot of other regional markets. Pakistan was probably about, I know Pakistan because we also had a large operation in Pakistan, but it was almost half of the Pakistani ad market. So, but we run a very tight ship, and we're very cognizant of our costs, but we're a commercial operator, and going forward, who knows? And if this continues, we may have to consider working with foundations to keep this business going, and our costs will go up, especially if we're based outside. You know, for us, the most important thing is, of course, to ensure that we don't have people who interfere with what we do. And, you know, over the years, I mean, if you look at the way we've covered issues and events, whether it's civilian killings with US bombings or human rights abuses, I don't think anyone has felt protected from our news coverage, in particular corruption and nepotism inside the country. We had enormous threats. We had more threats from the governments of Ashraf Ghani and Hamid Karzai than the Taliban. Well, so far, right? And, you know, because there was a lot at stake. You know, hundreds of millions of dollars were being stolen on a monthly basis, and for people to tackle these sorts of issues. And we had really courageous people that did these stories.
Then there is a recycled diplomat, just like myself, Rolf Willy Hansen, former ambassador.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a very interesting, enlightening presentation. I'm an old colleague of Kai's from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I used to be special representative for Afghanistan a couple of years ago. So I've been following very keenly what's happened since the last events. One thing you were hinting at was the regional parties. As a country, Norway always tried to encourage more engagement from the regional immediate neighbors to stay engaged in Afghanistan to try and be constructive for the future, and especially these days, that's more important than ever, I would think. And it seems to me that the Russians are still there, the Chinese, they still have their embassies there. I don't know about Iran, but how do you see the role that the immediate neighbors could play? And what is your estimate of Pakistan's role in the new circumstances? Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let's start with Pakistan, the most obvious party. The Pakistanis have consistently supported the Taliban, in particular the Haqqani network, and they made sure that the Haqqanis were in Kabul before anyone else. And as a result, the Haqqanis effectively control the major institutions in the country, including the Ministry of Interior, the Intelligence Agency, the Foreign Ministry, and so forth. I don't know what the mindset in Rawalpindi is with the military, but I do know that a lot of people in Pakistan are nervous over what's transpired if the world disengages. But they still have leverage. Perhaps not as much as they did 6 months ago, but they have leverage. Iran is one of the losers in Afghanistan because they supported the commanders predominantly from the south, people affiliated with the former Taliban leader Mansour. Those people have not been able to secure the key positions that they were hoping to secure, like the Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Interior. Russia, which wanted to see the Americans leave with limping, all of a sudden, what do we do now? They can see the threats. They see that this is not ending too well for Central Asia, for the region. The instability it could potentially cause right across, the Soviet Caucasus and so forth, in terms of these different groups of fighters who've gone in. I mean, just the last 12 months, I've heard something like 6,000 to 10,000 foreign fighters have moved to Afghanistan to fight. These people will go back home one day. The Chinese, they don't have the capacity nor the resources to fill this huge vacuum left behind by the international community, which is about $8.5 to $9 billion a year. They too have their concerns, and they should. So I think the entire region, one could argue, has buyer's remorse. But they have leverage. Some have leverage. And I think that's why it's important for the West, led by the Americans, who have the resources to step in and work with the region in order to, aim for a better outcome for all.
Please.
Hi, my name is Hamed. I studied journalism in Afghanistan, and I had lived with Taliban before I came to Norway. It's just a comment, it doesn't mean anything. What you're saying is like engaging with Taliban could be the same as the message that Imran Khan is giving, like engaging with Taliban, the world should give. I feel it as a lobbying for Taliban. But that's just a comment. My point is, would we see Shabake Khanda again on the TV shows or not? That's a program which we really liked before. It was a satire one, and it was a really good one. My question goes to Kai Idea, the second one. In 2007, there was a huge case of Pervis Kasai regarding the freedom of belief and things like that. If something like at that scale happens again, how much would Norway engage as it did before? Thank you.
Yeah, we have a 1 hour long, we have a comedy program from Herat, which is very good. Well, we're gonna extend that and make it twice a week. But Shabake Khanda was this very popular comedy program where they ridicule all the politicians. But I have some good news. It'll come back. But within the next few weeks. But maybe a different version of it. I don't think we can mimic Mullah Baradar or one of the Haqqanis. But comedy is important. But the Taliban, you know, they view comedy, they've told us, we don't want you to even ridicule our enemies. It's un-Islamic. So this comedy program from Herat's very interesting, that they're sort of tolerating, but they told us that even if you make fun of our enemies, we don't like it. It's not Islamic. You shouldn't make fun of anyone. So it's interesting that, but these Herati guys, I can't remember the name of the program, but they're very funny. So they're you know, I mean, every day is a new challenge for us. So the fact that we're surviving, it allows us to become a little bit, you know, I mean, I was telling Kai before we started putting some music, and they shut down our radio station in Helmand a few days ago. Although the guys in Kabul were tolerating it, the guys in Helmand said no. So we've got to look at these challenges, and sometimes when we push too hard, we've got to take a few steps back. But it's in the DNA of an organization such as ours to push the boundaries when we can. And to you,
Pervis Kasai, you mentioned. Was your question, what would Norway do today in a similar situation?
Yeah, something
Yes.
like that happening.
Yeah.
How much? Let's say you're engaged with Taliban, or the Norway, so they're adding them money through any organization. Would Norway use that as a leverage on Taliban?
Well, I think if the situation had been somewhat similar, but you must remember that first of all he had been sentenced to death first, and then I think it became 20 years, wasn't it? After?
Yes.
But the key to having him move, you know, was really President Karzai and Foreign Minister Spanta at the time, because the first step was to bring him from the prison where he was it close to Mazar? Mazar, and brought him from there to a prison in Kabul. That was the first step. And then the second step was to convince Karzai to move him from a prison in Kabul to a prison which was Palace 7, my house. And I say prison because after a while that became a prison to him too. And then all of a sudden, you know, and I was looking for, how can I get this man out? Karzai knew that I would try to get him out, but he pretended he didn't. And then when Carl Bildt came with the plane, Carl Bildt is a friend of mine from the early 1970s, I asked Carl to take him on board the plane. And he said, have you asked Karzai about this? I said, it's all right, it's all right. And so off he went, you know, in the back of a Swedish foreign minister's car. Would we engage again if the situation had been similar? Which means if we had been able to talk to the Taliban leaders as we could with Karzai. Well, sometimes I met Karzai 3 times a day. So it was a different situation. I doubt that we will ever get into that situation with the Taliban. You know? But if we should, I think that you're obliged to do that kind of thing.
And even if somebody like Kambash would live a day or two up to sentence now, that's a question.
I must say, I wish I would hear more from him. But it's 8 years since I heard from him last. And he was here, I think, 10 years ago. Almost precisely, William, wasn't it? Yeah.
He was here.
Yeah. And I was very proud to see him. Yeah. Any further questions?
One question.
Yeah, but you had already, we had to see if there's anybody else. Yes, Eugene?
An additional question to the neighbors. What kind of influence can the neighbors have in today's Afghanistan? We lost one country, Turkey. I know Turkey has a lot of internal problems for the moment being, not the least economically. But they also have an ambition. They've always had a huge ambition in Central Asia, and not the least in Afghanistan, northern Afghanistan especially. I wonder, do you know anything? What do you think? What kind of role could Turkey play here?
No, Turkey can play a very important role, not just because of the Turkic-Afghan population, but also because of their relationship with Qatar, for example. And Qatar is now the de facto representative for the US inside of Afghanistan. That task's been handed over to the Qataris. So I think Turkey can play an important role. And a couple of weeks ago, the Turkish foreign minister stood with the Indonesian foreign minister, Retno Marsudi, and they talked about engaging with the Taliban about women's rights and so forth, and going to Kabul together under the banner of the OIC to convince the Taliban of that. So those sorts of things are important. But the Turks also have, I wouldn't say leverage, but they have a big say in terms of any sort of outreach the Taliban may have in terms of our Turkic communities. They have become sort of the custodians of perhaps 15–20% of the population of the country. So I think they can play a constructive role. But at the moment, everyone realizes that they don't have the leverage they thought they would have. And they're trying to figure out where they can take a stand, because also it's a loss of face for a lot of them. You know, if the Russians step in and they make a certain demand. For example, the Iranians had a conference in Tehran. They expected the Taliban to show up, but they also wanted Karzai and Abdullah and a whole bunch of other people to go. And when that did not happen, they also said the Taliban cannot come. So, but it also shows how, you know, the Taliban is a very unpredictable group. And even with the Pakistanis, I don't see them doing what the Pakistanis are demanding, at least not 100%.
Okay, I think I have the last question. But then, as a prominent leader of media, how would you secure the freedom of speech in Afghanistan in the future? And, of course, how would you secure that Tolo is not used only as an asset for Taliban in the future?
Well, I mean, that's one of the challenges we face. I mean,
do you have any strategies?
No. No, we have red lines, and we're not going to be able to where we will not allow ourselves to be used. But we also understand that it's always a two-way street with the media outlet. People will have their say, and someone else will have their say. Afghans are very sophisticated, mostly thanks to the presence of the Russians in the country, or the Soviets, I should say. You know, they can differentiate between propaganda and, you know, and lies and the truth. What we're more concerned about are, you know, it's funny because one of the big challenges for us is actually fake stories from the other side. The genocide of people across the country, massacre of people in Panjshir, targeted killings, or these are things that we have to also be careful of. Propaganda, there's propaganda from both sides, and we have to find a way to be able to verify stories. And you know, one of the things we're working on right now is potentially creating an investigative unit outside of Afghanistan, utilizing our former journalists, where they can look into things, these types of allegations, financial, you know, fraud or massacre of minorities, and so forth. And they will have the protection of being outside the country. But yeah, these are huge responsibilities. I mean, I had a business that owns these assets, but they, you know, the hard work and the leadership really comes from people within the country and inside of Afghanistan. But thank you.
Yeah.
Final question.
Yeah. I have quite a loud voice. So
no, but not a comment, but a question.
It is a question. Yeah. As someone interested in international relations and having a pragmatic approach to contexts such as Afghanistan, you mentioned being pragmatic with dealing with Taliban. What would your suggestion be, or an approach, like priorities? Because you often hear about women's rights, which is obviously top priority, especially for Norway. But what if you would? It's hard to rank them. But what would be a pragmatic approach at current stage in dealing with Taliban?
Well, I think the immediate concern is the humanitarian crises and this economic crisis that the country's facing. I think that's probably needs to be priority number one. In terms of, I think we're on the same page. You know, us, me as an Afghan, the Norwegian government and others, the government needs to be we need a more broader approach to governing in the country. We need other people involved in government, women's representatives, perhaps some of the former leaders like Kasai or Abdullah, technocrats. I think that's going to serve everyone's interest, to be honest with you, longer term. But I think human rights are very important. Women's rights are very important. You can't deprive half your population. As we've seen, the country has benefited from women's participation in the workforce. We have to continue to be able to educate our women. Free expression is important. So I think there are like 5 or 10 things, and I think there's usually broad agreement in terms of achieving these aims.
I think we're coming to the end of our discussion, but I take away from you 2 or 3 important messages. First of all, the difficulties you face and your determination to continue and to find innovative ways also to continue to inform the Afghan public, which I think is tremendously important in this situation. Second is the need for us to engage, and that engagement doesn't necessarily mean recognition. The third is, and I must say for me that is the most important, and that is, let's not make the Afghan people again the victim. And particularly in the situation we are in now, with a hunger catastrophe almost certainly around the corner, tough winter, and we must really, as an international community, and I hope also our own country, that we'll devote more resources to trying to meet that challenge. And then, of course, to hopefully find ways to defreeze, gradually perhaps, the $9 billion that are frozen today, so that also it's not only the short-term challenges that we meet, but also the longer term. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is a small gift here of Afghan music, and please don't leave. There is one more thing in the program here. This is Norway-made Afghan music, and Hasina Jan, you will receive this one. Thank you so much. Now I have the pleasure to invite a very dignified representative of Afghan PEN, Mr. Wahid Barasta, who is recently a member of the Norwegian Society, as he is now joining the cities of refuge people in Norway. And Nesodden has now become a city of refuge, which is nice. And Wahid is a poet. He served as the Secretary General of Afghan PEN for many years. And I have to be personal, he's also a great friend. So Wahid, come and show your poetry, or your brother's poetry, or whatever you want to show.
Tusen tack. It's a great honor to be here today, and it's a great honor to see Mr. Saad Mohseni after so many years. And the history of the Afghan media can never forget the positive role that Tolo TV and Moby Group played in promoting and strengthening freedom of expression in Afghanistan. And I'm proud to be partly working for his media channel. The first short poems have been translated from the Persian language into English. The first short poem is to Edvard Munch. Did I pronounce it well? Yeah. As it's very short, I will first read Persian version so that the friends here feel the music in the original language. بی‌دردانند غرق بی‌غم باشی بی‌دردانند غرق بی‌غم باشی نام دگر عشق شده عیاشی در شعر نمی گنجد دردم ادوارد برخیز و بکن درد مرا نقاشی در شعر نمی گنجد دردم ادوارد برخیز و بکن چیغ مرا نقاشی. And the translation is, those who feel no pain enjoy a carefree life. Lust has become the other name of love these days. My pain can't be expressed in my poetry or Edvard. Rise and paint my scream. Thank you very much. Two more short poems. Like the clock, I'm a prison. Like the clock, I'm a prison and cannot go anywhere. Like the clock, I'm wandering in the seconds of my solitude. When you are away from me, I make my loneliness sleep with the lullaby of my tears. Thank you very much. And then the last one is by Hamid also, the last short one. Yes, I came from Afghanistan. Yes, I came from Afghanistan. Why do you look surprised? I'm neither a production of latest lamentable news nor as flown as depicted on media screens. See, I have a box of saffron in my bag, which smells as good as our village breeze. See, I have a classic poetry collection in my right pocket and a restless pen in my left. Why searching me for weapon and drugs? Don't ignore my bitter smile. We have been at war for years, but remember, we have also been in love. Tusen tack.
There will be a book here because in this you can note down further poems. Please. Thank you so much. Thank you.